The Boiling Frog by Daniel Quinn. Systems thinkers have given us a useful metaphor for a certain kind of human behavior in the phenomenon of the boiled frog. The phenomenon is this. If you drop a frog in a pot of boiling water, it will of course frantically try to clamber out. But if you place it gently in a pot of tepid water and turn the heat on low, it will float there quite placidly. As the water gradually heats up, the frog will sink into a tranquil stupor, exactly like one of us in a hot bath. And before long, with a smile on its face, it will unresistingly allow itself to be boiled to death. We all know stories of frogs being tossed into boiling water. For example, a young couple being plunged into catastrophic debt by an unforeseen medical emergency. A contrary example, an example of the smiling boiled frog, is that of a young couple who gradually use their good credit to buy and borrow themselves into catastrophic debt. Cultural examples exist as well. About 6,000 years ago, the goddess-worshipping societies of old Europe were engulfed in a boiling up of our culture that Maria Gimbutas called Kurgan Wave Number 1. They struggled to clamber out, but eventually succumbed. The Plains Indians of North America, who were engulfed in another boiling up of our culture in the 1870s, constitute another example. They struggled to clamber out over the next 2 decades, but they too finally succumbed. A contrary example, an example of the smiling boiled frog phenomenon, is provided by our own culture. When we slipped into the cauldron, the water was a perfect temperature, not too hot, not too cold. Can anyone tell me when that was? Anyone? Blank faces. I've already told you, but I'll ask again a different way. When did we become we? Where and when did the thing called us begin? Remember, East and West, twins of a common birth. Where and when? Well, of course, in the Near East, about 10,000 years ago. That's where our peculiar defining form of agriculture was born, and we began to be we. That was our cultural birthplace. That was where and when we slipped into that beautifully pleasant water, the Near East, 10,000 years ago. As the water in the cauldron slowly heats, the frog feels nothing but a pleasant warmth. And indeed, that's all there is to feel. A long time has to pass before the water begins to be dangerously hot, and our own history demonstrates this. For fully half our history, the first 5,000 years, signs of distress are almost non-existent. The technological innovations of this period bespeak a quiet life, centered around hearth and village, sun-dried brick, kiln-fired pottery, woven cloth, the potter's wheel, and so on. But gradually, imperceptibly, signs of distress begin to appear, like tiny bubbles at the bottom of a pot. What shall we look for as signs of distress? Mass suicides? Revolution? Terrorism? No, of course not. Those come much later, when the water is scalding hot. 5,000 years ago, it was just getting warm. Folks mopping their brows were grinning at each other, saying, "Isn't it great?" You'll know where to find the signs of distress if you identify the fire that was burning under the cauldron. It was burning there in the beginning, was still burning after 5,000 years, and is still burning today in exactly the same way. It was and is the great heating element of our revolution. It's the essential, it's a sine qua non of our success, if success is what it is. Speak. Someone tell me what I'm talking about. Agriculture. Agriculture, this gentleman tells me. No, not agriculture. One particular style of agriculture. One particular style that has been the basis of our culture from its beginnings 10,000 years ago to the present moment. The basis of our culture and founded no other. It's ours. It's what makes us us. For its complete ruthlessness toward all other life forms on this planet, and for its unyielding determination to convert every square meter of this planet to the production of human food. I've called it totalitarian agriculture. Ethologists, students of animal behavior, and a few philosophers who have considered the matter know that there is a form of ethics practiced in the community of life on this planet, apart from us, that is. This is a very practical, you might say Darwinian sort of ethics, since it serves to safeguard and promote biological diversity within the community. According to this ethics, followed by every sort of creature within the community of life, sharks as well as sheep, killer bees as well as butterflies, you may compete to the full extent of your capabilities, but you may not hunt down your competitors, or destroy their food, or deny them access to food. In other words, you may compete, but you may not wage war. This ethics is violated at every point by practitioners of totalitarian agriculture. We hunt down our competitors, we destroy their food, and we deny them access to food. That is indeed the whole purpose and point of totalitarian agriculture. Totalitarian agriculture is based on the premise that all the food in the world belongs to us, and there is no limit whatever to what we may take for ourselves and deny to all others. Totalitarian agriculture was not adopted in our culture out of sheer meanness. It was adopted because, by its very nature, it's more productive than any other style. And there are many other styles. Totalitarian agriculture represents productivity to the max, as Americans like to say. It represents productivity in a form that literally cannot be exceeded. Many styles of agriculture, not all but many, produce food surpluses. But not surprisingly, totalitarian agriculture produces larger surpluses than any other style. It produces surpluses to the max. You simply can't outproduce a system designed to convert all the food in the world into human food. Totalitarian agriculture is the fire under our cauldron. Totalitarian agriculture is what has kept us on the boil here for 10,000 years. The people of our culture take food so much for granted that they often have a hard time seeing that there is a necessary connection between the availability of food and population growth. For them, I found it necessary to construct a small illustrative experiment with laboratory mice. Imagine, if you will, a cage with movable sides so that it can be enlarged to any desired size. We begin by putting 10 healthy mice of both sexes into the cage, along with plenty of food and water. In just a few days, there will, of course, be 20 mice, and we accordingly increase the amount of food we're putting in the cage. In a few weeks, as we steadily increase the amount of available food, there will be 40, then 50, then 60, and so on, until one day there's 100. And let's say that we've decided to stop the growth of the colony at 100. I'm sure you realize we don't need to pass out little condoms or birth control pills to achieve this effect. All we have to do is stop increasing the amount of food that goes into the cage. Every day we put in an amount that we know is sufficient to sustain 100 mice, and no more. This is the part that many find hard to believe, but trust me, it's the truth. The growth of the community stops dead. Not overnight, of course, but in very short order. Putting in an amount of food sufficient for 100 mice, we will find, every single time, that the population of the cage soon stabilizes at 100. Of course, I don't mean 100 precisely. It will fluctuate between 90 and 110, but never go much beyond those limits. On average, day after day, year after year, decade after decade, the population inside the cage will be 100. Now, if we should decide to have a population of 200 mice instead of 100, we won't have to add aphrodisiacs to their diets or play erotic mouse movies for them. We'll just have to increase the amount of food we put in the cage. If we put in enough for 200, we'll soon have 200. If we put in enough for 300, we'll soon have 300. If we put in enough for 400, we'll soon have 400. If we put in enough for 500, we'll soon have 500. This isn't a guess, my friends. This isn't a conjecture. This is a certainty. Of course, you understand that there's nothing special about mice in this regard. The same will happen with crickets or trout or badgers or sparrows. But I fear that many people may bridle at the idea that humans might be included in this list, because as individuals we're able to govern our reproductive capacities, they imagine our growth as a species should be unresponsive to the mere availability of food. Luckily for the point I'm trying to make here, I have considerable data showing that, as a species, we're as responsive as any other to the availability of food. 3 million years of data, in fact. For all but the last 10,000 years of that period, the human species was a very minor member of the world ecosystem. Imagine it, 3 million years, and the human race did not overrun the earth. There was some growth, of course, through simple migration from continent to continent, but this growth was proceeding at a glacial rate. It's estimated that the human population at the beginning of the Neolithic was around 10 million. 10 million, if you can imagine that, after 3 million years. Then very suddenly things began to change. And the change was that the people of one culture in one corner of the world developed a peculiar form of agriculture that made food available to people in unprecedented quantities. Following this, in this corner of the world, the population doubled in a scant 3,000 years. It doubled again, this time in only 2,000 years. In an eye blink of time on the geological scale, the human population jumped from 10 million to 50 million, probably 80% of them being practitioners of totalitarian agriculture, members of our culture, East and West. The water in the cauldron was getting warm, and signs of distress were beginning to appear.